Doom the Dark Ages is doomed. It is the Dark Ages of the Doom franchise. This is a new era of video games in which gamers everywhere are finally coming out, finally being brave and experienced enough to say, you know, Doom isn't that great. And there is quite a lot of pushback to this growing realization among the community, but Doom Eternal was not very good. And by all accounts, Doom the Dark Ages is even worse. Nobody seems to be all that happy with this game, other than the most like hardcore fanboys who desperately need Doom to validate themselves as real men. Doom the Dark Ages is Doom as a concept, as an IP, is probably one of the most defining examples of just how mediocre video game IPs manage to keep themselves relevant simply by presenting themselves as being more mature or sophisticated than the far superior, more critically acclaimed, better selling Nintendo competitors, right? Doom has always been hyped up primarily because it's bloody and because it's satanic and because of its imagery, right? It really has nothing to do with the first-person gameplay. And that's very important to understand when going into this and talking about the game and its legacy and stuff like that. Nobody actually cares about Doom as a game. Doom is just one of those things that's shoved in front of your face and you're supposed to like it because it's Doom, right? It's essentially Twilight for boys. When you really just break it down, like what makes Doom popular, it's very superficial, very basic, very simplistic, like nonsensical. Doom has always been a low value IP with no real redeeming qualities. And that's why it fell off by the 2000s and never really had a resurgence until Doom 2016, which was basically just selling the same game again to an aging, decrepit audience, right? Doom 2016 was popular because it was indistinguishable from the original Doom games in most superficial aspects when it comes to the action, the gameplay, like the mechanics, the features, right? Doom 2016 did everything it possibly could to recapture the childhood of aging millennials, right? And that's why Doom 2016 was so popular, right? People were able to forget about their miserable, lonely lives and just go kill demons for 20 hours or so, right? Doom 2016 was not a very good video game, but it was something that appealed to a certain niche demographic from a certain time period, right? Now that it's come time for the sequels to that mediocre, uninspired shooter, now that like Doom 2016 is like old and decrepit itself, people are going to realize that like, wow, I am not having fun with Doom anymore. Doom Eternal had plenty of people coming out and like acknowledging this doesn't feel like Doom, this isn't what I wanted, this game isn't fun to play, and like they were shadowed down by the community and by game journals who were very desperate to present Doom Eternal as being this huge Game of the Year contender when in reality it wasn't even the best game released that day, right? Doom Eternal was honestly kind of a milestone, I think, a glowing early example of what the AAA gaming formula was going to look like competing against major Nintendo Switch games. It is the defining example, I think, because everyone came out and said that Doom Eternal would easily outperform Animal Crossing New Horizons, that Nintendo was insane for releasing that game on the same day as like the highly anticipated Doom Eternal, and then reality sets in and Animal Crossing sells like over 10 times more, right? That is insane that like an IP that has traditionally been like disrespected and ignored and downplayed like Animal Crossing so severely downplayed one of the most worshipped and astroturf gaming IPs in the entire industry, right? But that's the reality of the current gaming industry, where nobody talks about the real success stories, the real GOATs. All they talk about is how excited they are for like Ellie to like be adapted into live action. That's the modern gaming industry. They don't care about what's actually being made and what actually exists. The idea is to like always be perpetually excited for the next new thing on PlayStation or Xbox, which is why we get all these bizarre like hype cycles for games that nobody cares about, like Astrobot, Hi-Fi Rush, Baldur's Gate 3, Claire Obscura being a recent example, Black Myth Wukong, right? None of these games have really left any real impact on gaming culture or iconography, but like these were the games that people were talking about instead of the major Nintendo games that people are going to be talking about for decades. People downplayed Princess Peach Showtime when it first came out, but considering how Princess Peach, Super Princess Peach, is still talked about today, like it's safe to say that like that game Showtime is going to be far more fondly remembered than essentially anything that came out around the same period. Like it's just kind of remarkable in that sense how this game is going to define Princess Peach, one of the premier female video game characters in the industry, like how it's going to define this character going forward. In that regard, the game is extremely notable and will be continued to be analyzed and discussed for years to come. It was a major deal, and yet like the industry just turned its nose up at it because these casual gamers thought it was too easy when you could watch their reviews and see them dying over and over and over again in that game. That's the kind of mentality these people are in. Like they're not interested in actually playing unique and fresh experiences. They want the status of playing the right games. And that's basically what like Doom's reputation and its legacy essentially amounts to, is that it is the defining example of being the right game. A game that like superficially appeals to American sensibilities, that is hyped up, that is worshipped, that is like promoted as like this huge cultural landmark and icon, when in reality, even at the height of its popularity, it was getting far outstripped by the far more popular and successful Nintendo games that came out around the same period. Games like Contra 3, games like Super Metroid, games like Super Mario World, Donkey Kong Country, all of which have had a far more enduring legacy than Doom ever has or ever will. Doom, I think, is an early example of just the industry propping up an idol. I would put it right up there with like Sonic the Hedgehog or Tomb Raider as just like kind of these false industry icons that have been propped up by the Western gaming industry to try and pretend that there's more competition to Nintendo's first party titles than there actually is. Sonic the Hedgehog, the most successful of these Western creations. Like Sonic never really even came close to like outstripping Mario, even at like the peak of his popularity. People tend to lean into the comics and the games and like and the cartoons and like the supplementary material, but like just comparing the movies, just seeing how like popular the Mario movie was, like the reality is very self-evident, is that Sonic the Hedgehog just can't compete with Mario and never was, and yet we're led to believe even today that they were at one point like industry rivals. It's just completely out of pocket and just completely disjointed and makes no sense. Doom the Dark Ages is basically like, I think, an adult version of that. So instead of like having a cute cartoon mascot trying to like outdo Mario, it's like some developer just being like hyper violent because that's not what Nintendo does. Like, oh, we're way more mature than Nintendo, but okay, but what else do you do, bro? And like, there is no real clear answer to that. Like, when you really look at like Doom Eternal and Doom the Dark Ages, when you look at like the superficial gameplay changes and everything the games do, like what you're left with is this like empty feeling of just like, wow, this is the best they could come up with. Most people aren't really like acknowledging it. Most people aren't admitting it, but Doom the Dark Ages is, just like its predecessor, a complete disappointment.